All right, so we are diving deep into this thought experiment that's had philosophers scratching their heads for decades now,
Yeah.
the Chinese room argument.
Yeah, the Chinese room.
And you've brought us some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on this.
Right.
So I think we're going to be exploring some really interesting stuff about AI and language and,
And what it means to understand something.
exact, like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
So what I find so interesting about this is that, this argument's from the 1980s, and it feels even more relevant now
Oh, absolutely.
with AI like
It
ChatGPT.
really makes you question, what is intelligence? And how do we even know
Right.
if something is intelligent?
Right. And back then, the AI landscape was pretty different. I mean, lots of optimism.
Yeah.
People were like, oh, computers, they already understand
And
language.
this is where John Searle kind of comes, he's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Put the brakes on.
And he comes up with this thought experiment, the Chinese room, to challenge that notion.
Okay, so paint the picture for me. What exactly is this Chinese room scenario?
All right, so imagine you're in a room. You have no Chinese skills whatsoever.
Okay.
You've got these boxes and boxes of Chinese symbols.
Mhm.
Think of it like a giant database of these symbols, and you have an English rule book for manipulating them.
Okay.
So it's like this complex puzzle, and you have the instructions,
Right.
but you don't understand the meaning behind the pieces.
Okay, I'm in the room feeling very out of my element.
Right.
What happens next?
So somebody slips questions in Chinese under the door.
Okay.
You meticulously follow the rule book. You move the symbols around you, produce answers that are indistinguishable from those of a native Chinese speaker.
Wow.
But Searle's point is you still don't understand Chinese.
Right.
You're just manipulating these symbols.
So it's like a computer spitting out grammatically correct sentences.
Yeah.
But not really getting what they're saying.
Precisely. It's syntax without the semantics.
Got it.
And Searle, he's arguing against this idea of strong AI.
Strong AI.
Which is the belief that programmed computers can truly understand
Right.
and have mental states like us humans.
Right.
He's saying just because a computer can process symbols doesn't mean it's thinking like a human.
Okay, so that's strong AI. What about weak AI? How does that fit into all of this?
Weak AI is a bit more modest.
Okay.
It argues computers are really useful tools for simulating mental abilities,
Okay.
but they don't actually possess them.
So like a flight simulator.
Exactly, like a flight simulator. It gives you the experience of flying, but it's not actually flying.
Right. We're not actually going anywhere.
Yeah.
Got it. So the Chinese room thought experiment is really taking aim at strong AI.
Yes.
It's saying just following a bunch of rules, no matter how complex they are, that's not the same as actually understanding.
And that leads to some really interesting counter-arguments.
Okay.
One of the main ones is called the systems reply.
The system's reply.
This reply says, okay, maybe you in the room don't understand Chinese,
Right.
but the system as a whole, the rule book, the symbols,
Mhm.
that entire system does understand.
So like a collective intelligence that's emerging from all the parts, even if the individual parts don't get it.
Right, kind of like an ant colony.
Interesting.
The individual ants might not have a grand plan,
Right.
but the colony as a whole exhibits this complex behavior.
Right. I see where they're going with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But wouldn't Searle then just say, well, even if I memorized every single rule in that book
Yeah.
and every symbol,
Yeah.
I still wouldn't understand Chinese. I'd just be really good at manipulating symbols?
You'd be like a walking Chinese dictionary,
Right.
but unable to connect the words to their actual meaning in the world.
Couldn't someone argue that, well, if we put this computer in a robot body,
Right.
let it interact with the world,
Mm.
maybe then it could learn and understand?
Yeah, that's the robot reply.
The robot reply.
The idea is that through experiencing the world, the computer gets the grounding it needs to connect the symbols to real-world concepts, like a child learning through observation and interaction.
But wouldn't Searle then just say, well, hold on, even a robot with all these fancy sensors, it's still just getting more data, more symbols. It's not really bridging that gap to actual understanding.
He would say it's still syntax manipulation of symbols,
Right.
not semantics, not grasping the meaning.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so what about the brain simulator reply?
Okay.
What if we had a computer that could perfectly mimic a human brain? Wouldn't it understand then?
That's a great question.
It seems like, if it's doing everything the brain is doing, shouldn't it be able to understand like a brain?
That's where Searle would say simulation is not duplication.
Simulation is not duplication.
He uses this analogy of a computer simulating digestion.
Okay.
The computer can model the process of digestion,
Right.
but it's not actually digesting anything.
Because it's missing the actual physical stomach and all
The
that.
biological process, exactly.
The biology.
And he would apply the same logic to the brain.
Mm.
He seems to lean towards mind-brain identity theory.
Mind-brain identity theory.
Which is the idea that the mind is essentially the physical brain.
Okay.
A simulation, even a perfect one, just mimics brain activity without having the same causal powers.
So for Searle, consciousness and understanding are tied to the biology of the brain.
Yeah.
Not just information processing.
That's at the heart of his argument.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got this idea of strong AI, weak AI Searle coming in with this Chinese room thought experiment.
Right.
Saying, hold on, folks, not so fast.
Yeah.
And then people are coming back with these counter-arguments, like the systems reply and the robot reply.
Right.
And the brain simulator reply.
And there are even more counter-arguments out there.
Okay, so it seems like we're in this kind of philosophical standoff.
Yeah.
Is there any way to resolve this?
Well, that's what we're going to try to figure out.
Okay, great.
As we delve deeper into the Chinese room and explore some of its fascinating implications.
I can't wait. This is getting really interesting.
Me too.
It seems like the Chinese room isn't just about computers and language. It's really about fundamental questions of being consciousness and how we understand the world around us.
Absolutely. And with AI becoming more and more advanced, these questions are becoming more urgent than ever.
I agree. All right, so I think we've done a good job of laying the groundwork here.
Yeah.
We've set the stage for what the Chinese room is all about.
Right.
But let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve into some of the more mind-bending implications of this thought experiment.
Sounds good.
I'm excited to see where this takes us.
Me too. This is going to be fun. You know what's interesting is that the Chinese room thought experiment, even though it really focuses on language, it kind of opens up this broader question about, what is understanding in any domain.
So we're not just talking about whether a computer can, speak Mandarin or something.
Right.
It's more like, can it actually grasp concepts? Can it solve problems? Can it maybe even be creative in a way that we think of as intelligent?
Exactly. It gets to this question of, is intelligence something that can be boiled down to just algorithms and computations?
Right.
Or is there something uniquely human that we can't just replicate in, circuits and wires?
Right. And Searle, with his focus on intentionality and consciousness, it seems like he's in the camp of there's something more.
He is, yeah. He would say that computers, they lack that inherent boutness that human thoughts have. So they can manipulate symbols that represent things in the world.
Right.
But they don't actually have the experience of those things.
It's like they can process information about a hamburger.
Right.
But they haven't actually, tasted a hamburger.
Exactly. They don't know the joy of biting into a juicy burger.
Right. They don't have that lived experience.
And this kind of ties back to that distinction Searle makes between simulation and duplication.
Right. Well, a computer can simulate digestion.
Yeah.
But it's not actually digesting anything.
Exactly. It's just modeling the steps, but it's not actually breaking down food and getting nutrients.
Right. So it can simulate intelligent behavior.
Right.
But does it actually possess genuine intelligence?
And Searle would say no, even a computer that perfectly replicates the neural activity of a human brain.
Wow.
It wouldn't actually be conscious or understand things the way we do.
Because for him, consciousness is an emergent property of the actual biological brain.
Yes.
Not just a result of information processing.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm with you. So far, this is really interesting. But wouldn't evolution favor a system that could perfectly simulate understanding? I mean, if a simulated mind could navigate the world, solve problems, even create art just as well as a human, what evolutionary advantage would there be to genuine understanding?
That's a really great point, and it leads to this fascinating implication of Searle's argument, which is that if he's right, genuine understanding might actually be epiphenomenal.
Epiphenomenal. What does that mean?
It means it doesn't actually have a causal impact on behavior.
So a simulated mind and a genuinely understanding mind would be indistinguishable.
Yeah, in terms of their actions and their ability to survive and thrive in the world.
So you couldn't tell a difference by just looking at their behavior.
That's exactly. Which creates a bit of a problem for Searle's view.
Okay, I see that. How so?
Because if genuine understanding doesn't actually provide any evolutionary advantage, then why would it have evolved in the first place?
Yeah, it's like saying consciousness is just this cosmic accident.
Right, like a byproduct of our complex brains that doesn't actually serve a purpose.
Wow, that's a bit unsettling.
Yeah, it's a pretty deep thought.
Okay, so bringing this back to AI, if Searle is right and genuine understanding requires something more than just computation, does that mean the quest for artificial general intelligence is doomed to fail?
That's a question that's creating a lot of debate in the AI community.
I can imagine.
Some researchers, they believe Searle's argument highlights these fundamental limitations of our current approaches to AI.
Which are largely based on computational models.
Right. So they argue that we need a completely different paradigm.
Like what?
To create machines that truly understand and are conscious.
So maybe incorporating things like embodiment, emotions, even a sense of self.
Exactly. Those are all possibilities that researchers are exploring.
Fascinating. But on the other hand, there are some AI proponents who might say Searle's setting the bar too high.
Right.
They might argue that our concept of understanding is itself evolving
Yeah,
as AI becomes more sophisticated.
that's right. They might say we're already seeing glimpses of genuine intelligence in machines.
Okay, but is it really genuine or just a really good simulation?
That's the debate they'd point to AI systems like ChatGPT.
Right, which can generate text, translate languages, compose different kinds of creative content.
Exactly, and they'd say maybe we need to broaden our definition of intelligence.
To include these unique capabilities of machines.
Right, because maybe we're being too human-centered in our thinking.
That's a good point.
And this kind of brings us back to the Turing test.
Right, which we talked about earlier.
Turing proposed that if a machine could converse in a way that's indistinguishable from a human, then we should consider it intelligent.
But Searle's Chinese room argument could be seen as a direct challenge to the Turing test.
Exactly, because he's saying a machine could pass the Turing test.
Meaning it could hold a convincing conversation.
Right, but without actually understanding the meaning of the words it's using.
So it comes back to that syntax versus semantics distinction.
Precisely, and this raises a huge question.
Which is?
If a machine can mimic human conversation so well that we can't tell the difference, does it really matter if it understands in the same way we do?
Wow, that's a really profound question. And especially with the rise of these large language models like ChatGPT,
Right.
it's getting harder and harder to tell a difference.
It really blurs the lines between human and machine communication.
So Searle's thought experiment is more relevant now than ever.
I think so.
It's forcing us to really examine our assumptions about intelligence, understanding, and even consciousness.
And it's pushing us to consider the ethical implications of creating machines that might one day rival or even surpass our own cognitive abilities.
You're right. It's not just a philosophical exercise anymore.
Yeah, the Chinese room is starting to feel less like a thought experiment and more like a glimpse into our possible future.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about, the person in the room, the symbols, the rule book.
Right.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the human element of all of this.
Yeah?
Because the Chinese room, it focuses on this solitary individual.
It does, yeah.
But in reality, human understanding is rarely so solitary, right?
Right. We don't learn and understand in isolation.
We're constantly interacting with others, with the world around us.
Exactly. And those interactions shape our understanding of everything.
So it really does take a village to develop language and meaning.
It does. And this brings us to another reply to the Chinese room, the other mind's reply.
The other mind's reply. Okay, I haven't heard of this one.
This one argues that if we judge other humans' understanding based on their behavior, why shouldn't we apply that same standard to AI?
Because we can't directly access other people's minds either.
Right. We can only observe their behavior and infer their understanding from that.
So if an AI system can convincingly engage in conversation, solve problems, even express what seem like emotions,
Yeah.
would that be enough to say it understands in a meaningful way?
That's what the other mind's reply suggests, and it's a perspective that a lot of people find compelling, especially as AI systems become more integrated into our lives.
Right, like they're working alongside us in all these different fields now.
Exactly. So the question of whether their understanding is genuine might become less important than whether it's functionally equivalent to our own.
It's like asking if a prosthetic leg truly walks. It might not replicate the biological processes of a human leg,
Right.
but if it enables someone to move freely and interact with the world, does that distinction really matter?
That's a great analogy. It really highlights how AI is challenging our traditional categories and definitions.
Right, like what is intelligence? What is understanding? What does it even mean to be conscious?
Yeah. AI is blurring all those lines.
So where does all this leave us? What does it mean for the future?
I think the Chinese room argument, even though it's from decades ago, it's incredibly relevant today.
It is.
It's this cautionary tale against attributing human-like qualities to machines just because they can mimic our behavior.
It's a reminder that intelligence is complex,
Yeah.
and our understanding of it is constantly evolving.
And as we move further into this age of AI, We need to grapple with these questions not just technologically, but philosophically and ethically as well.
Because the choices we make today about how we develop and interact with AI will shape our society, our relationships, even our sense of self.
If Searle is right and true understanding requires something beyond computation, then we need to figure out what that something is.
And we need to ask ourselves, what kind of intelligence do we want to create?
Exactly. It's a huge responsibility, but it's also a massive opportunity.
By engaging with these tough questions, we can not only learn more about AI, but also about ourselves and our place in the universe.
This deep dive into the Chinese room argument has definitely given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It's a conversation that crosses disciplines and generations, and I think it's one that we need to keep having.
Absolutely. As AI continues to advance at this incredible pace, the questions raised by Searle's thought experiment become even more important.
So as you encounter these increasingly sophisticated AI systems in your own life,
Right, like chatbots, voice assistants, self-driving cars.
we encourage you to ask yourself, how do you define understanding?
Right. What would convince you that a machine truly grasps the meaning behind its words or actions?
These are tough questions, but they're worth asking.
They are, because the future of AI and its impact on humanity hinges on our willingness to engage in these complex and vital conversations.
And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's important to emphasize one final point.
Okay.
The Chinese room argument, even though it focuses on the potential limitations of AI, it also illuminates something really profound about human intelligence itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Searle's thought experiment, it forces us to confront the mystery of consciousness, the elusive nature of understanding the intricate relationship between mind, body, and the world around us.
It's highlighting just how complex human cognition really is.
Exactly, something that we often take for granted.
So by trying to understand what machines lack, we might actually gain a deeper appreciation for what makes us uniquely human.
That's the idea, and I think that's one of the most fascinating and enduring legacies of the Chinese room argument.
This has been a truly mind-expanding conversation.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to explore.
But for now, I think it's time to give our listener a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed.
Okay.
We'll be back shortly to wrap up our deep dive into the Chinese room and its lasting implications. As we wrap up our deep dive into the Chinese room, it really makes you realize just how complex these questions about AI and understanding really are.
It does. It's like the more you dig into it, the more you realize how much we still don't know.
It's fascinating, right? And I think what strikes me is that this quest to understand AI is so closely tied to the quest to understand ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. The Chinese room, it's almost like it's holding a mirror up to our own minds, you know?
Yeah.
It makes us question, what are our thoughts? What are our experiences? How do we interact with the world?
It's like Searle is saying, hey, let's not just take our own intelligence for granted.
Right.
Let's really examine those deeper mechanisms, the assumptions, the things that we don't even realize we're doing when we think and understand.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most valuable aspects of the Chinese room. It doesn't just tell us about AI, it also opens up these new ways of exploring human understanding itself.
Right. It's prompting us to ask, what are the limits of our own cognition? How do we form beliefs? How do we make decisions? How do we experience the world? All these fundamental questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
Exactly. And the Chinese room adds this whole new dimension to these questions.
It's amazing to me how this thought experiment about, a hypothetical room and some symbols and a rule book can lead us to these really profound reflections on what it means to be and to know.
It's a testament to the power of thought experiments, you know?
Yeah.
They can really push the boundaries of our understanding in ways that we might not even expect.
Right. They allow us to kind of play with these abstract concepts, challenge our assumptions, and just imagine possibilities that we might not have considered otherwise.
Exactly. And the Chinese room has definitely done that. It's sparked a conversation that's still going strong.
Oh, yeah. Across so many different fields, from philosophy and computer science to cognitive psychology and neuroscience.
And it's a conversation that has real-world implications, for how we design AI systems, how we think about the ethics of intelligent machines.
Right. Even how we view ourselves as conscious beings in a world that seems to be increasingly populated by artificial minds.
It's a big deal.
It is. So I know we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone pretty deep into the weeds. But if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this whole deep dive, it's that the Chinese room argument, it's not about giving us definitive answers.
Right.
It's about asking the right questions.
It's about encouraging us to think critically, to be curious, and to really engage with the mysteries of intelligence.
Both artificial and our own.
Exactly.
So as you encounter AI systems in your own life, whether it's a chatbot or a voice assistant or even a self-driving car,
Right.
think about the Chinese room.
Yeah.
Let it be a reminder that understanding AI is a journey, not a destination.
And that the most important insights often come from asking the questions that don't have easy answers.
Right. It's about embracing that uncertainty, that ambiguity, and being willing to keep exploring even when things get complicated.
I think that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
It's a journey that requires us to be thoughtful, critical, and open to new ways of thinking.
And ultimately, it's a journey that can lead us to a deeper understanding not just of AI, but of ourselves and what it means to be human in this rapidly changing world.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Chinese room argument. We hope you found it insightful, and we encourage you to keep exploring these questions and engage in these conversations because the future of AI and its impact on humanity depends on it.